Okay, joining us today, we have the Athletics' Matt Slater and also Adam Crafton, who dropped a piece on the Athletic earlier this week detailing why European football matches might finally be coming to the USA. I mean, Adam, amazing spectacle of football last night in the Champions League. I mean, a goal fest, and I can imagine fans in America were watching it. Same as you, goodness knows what time you were getting up. But I mean, if you think about, the big CBS deal or the Paramount deal for the Champions League, I'm talking billions of pounds. There's a real appetite there, really, isn't there, for Americans to get that flavour of European football?
Yeah, I suppose the key things to remember here are international rights deals now for the Premier League outpace the domestic deal, and the most recent Champions League deal I think was a kind of was it a 2.5 times uplift on the previous one as well. You're talking, really, really big money now, and you have to remember as well with the Champions League in the States, it's quite hard actually to make time in your day to watch this thing, right? Because it's pretty inconvenient. It's about 3 in the afternoon. Most people are at work, but still, people are. I think it's become. I was talking to some people yesterday who were saying it's almost just become habit to have it on in the office, right? You're almost simulcasting these games in the office, or you're as you get in from school, from high school or junior elementary school, people have it on at sort of 4:30 in the afternoon to catch the second half. So I think it's becoming kind of a fabric of people's lives. I think the quite interesting thing with the Champions League, and this was definitely something that was in the minds of the people who wanted to do the Super League, was could you have some of these games at the weekend
Mm.
as well? Because that market obviously then becomes even bigger. And I do wonder over time whether, the Champions League could go that way. Perhaps you move quite a few FA Cup matches to become midweek games rather than weekend games as part of that. But that's kind of a broader story. The background to this is a filing that dropped last week in Manhattan, which basically said that a settlement had been reached between FIFA and a promoter, an events company called Relevant Sport. Now, Relevant Sport, founded by a billionaire, Stephen Ross, who owns Miami Dolphins, and his company for quite a long time have been involved in soccer. So this isn't just like someone that's come along out of the blue thinking, I want to disrupt the sport. It has been for quite a long time. He's had a pretty strong relationship with big clubs in Europe. So you can remember those pre-season tournaments called the International Champions Cup, which took
Yeah.
place in the United States and Asia, and became pretty popular attendance-wise, and clubs took them a little bit more seriously than you were maybe taking pre-season games previously. So that's been going on for around a decade or so. But more crucially, he's also been involved with negotiating TV rights on behalf of European clubs and European leagues, and also UEFA itself. So that deal we were talking about with CBS just now was negotiated by Relevant. La Liga have a very long-standing deal now with Relevant, and I think it was 1.4 billion deal they did with ESPN in 2018. I think it was an eight or 10-year deal, was also negotiated by Relevant. So what I'm trying to convey there is these guys are already really embroiled in European football. Now, what they would like to do and what they tried to do in 2018 is take a La Liga game, Spanish La Liga game between Barcelona and Girona to Miami, host it in Miami,
Mm.
and give that US fan base or any different part of the world meaningful access to this sport that they are clearly hugely engaged and invested in. Now, this was resisted by, well, by a lot of people, and we'll go into
Mm.
many different stakeholders. But crucially, there was a FIFA directive at the time that said games must take place on home territory, barring exceptional circumstances. And they then tried the next year to do an Ecuadorian game in the US as well. That was then blocked by the US Soccer Federation, basically pointing to that directive by FIFA. And then for the last 5 years, FIFA have been involved in a lawsuit and US soccer as well have also been embroiled in that. And Relevant have brought that case, basically set arguing that FIFA are acting and US soccer are conspiring, so it kind of acts as a monopoly and prevent people from hosting these games, saying it's anti-competitive, that it's not fair, that that if the access can be there, and if the people involved want it to happen, then why can't we do it? Why should FIFA get to decide this thing in the first place? And that's been the case that's been going on for 5 years, and it's kind of just been this background noise. Like everyone in football's known it's there, but it's just been background noise until last week, where it was announced there was a settlement. We don't know what exactly the settlement is, but what we do know is that it was settled. It was settled without prejudice, which means that it can be reopened at any time. And as far as I understand it, this basically now means that FIFA have agreed to go back and look at their policies on this issue. And the fact Relevant have settled without prejudice basically means if FIFA don't really do what they want, they will just go back to court, right? And in the conversations I've had over the past week, it very much looks to me as though FIFA are going to be stepping back from giving a strong view on this.
Yeah.
And therefore, the battle will probably now be looking at, if you want to get really into it, I think it's rule 8.2 in the FIFA handbook, which basically starts to put this responsibility onto federations and confederations. So that would be a battle between organizations like domestic leagues, but also if it was in England, the English Football Association, UEFA, CONCACAF, the US Soccer Federation, and that's where the next stage of this battle will be. But ultimately, I suppose the story here is that this thing might be happening, but we will discuss as well the many, many, many challenges that it would take in order to get it over the line.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I can understand from a relevant perspective. You see these sort of pre-season matches, some of them, friendlies really, don't really mean anything, sold out. I mean, you can see the financial implications for this for someone like Relevant. Are you surprised that FIFA have sort of backed down a little bit over this conversation?
No, but for several reasons. So one is that FIFA hates kind of conflict, and endlessly bangs on about the football family. And I think it read the room, that there is, for the reason you outline in your question, interest in this happening, that FIFA is well aware of. FIFA is, of course, increasingly excited about the club game, has expanded its own Club World Cup, and really, really wants to host it in places like the States and Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. So it looks a little bit hypocritical. I know that's not a domestic competition, but is very, very interested in staging more meaningful club games around the world. FIFA's also, I think, a little bit concerned about being taken to court, particularly in the US, where there is a lot of discovery. That means where the various sides in a dispute can start demanding information that they think might help their case. And that can be emails, documents, etc., etc. It can be embarrassing, right? So this is one of the reasons why people settle. They don't want to go through a discovery process. I think I've been talking to people about this for a while. There's been this sort of feeling that Relevant actually have quite a good case. Now, look, I'm speaking as a sports news reporter. I'm not taking sides here. I'm telling you what lawyers think of US law. And they thought that Relevant always had a good chance here. And there is no doubt that there is a business case for this type of thing. Now, type of thing, we can go off in all sorts of directions, right? But game, soccer, football in North America, big tick. Really big games, meaningful games, competitive games. Yeah, I think there's an appetite for the real thing there. How, when, who to be argued about, thought about. But ultimately, and I think this is where Adam was going with his point about FIFA stepping back and leaving it to confederations, FAs, here we get into haggling, here we get into deal making. Because really, the FIFA directive was, I wouldn't say it was an overreach, but it possibly was an overreach. The way it was supposed to be was that these things could happen if your league asked your FA, who asked your confederation. That's the way the sort of football family works. And they ask the confederation concerned where the game would go, and they would ask the relevant FA. And so you go up the tree and then you go down the tree the other side, right? And everyone is speaking to everybody at the same level. And if both parties ultimately, the league that wants to take their game abroad and the country that it's going to are like, well, all right, fine, yeah, we can do this, then that should happen. And I think that's where we'll get to. And then it all comes down to money again, right? So there'll be revenue sharing conversations. There'll be, well, you coming over here with your really, really sexy products that I'm increasingly worried about people in my country are watching as opposed to our domestic league. If you're willing to share some of the money with us, fine, I compensate us, or even perhaps more proactively, if we can cross promote and if we can somehow kind of hitch our wagon to yours and yours, use your product to draw attention to us. So yes, I'm going to pick on America here. Yes, American Premier League fan, right? Here's an amazing game, a real game that you've got to go to see. But if you really love going to games, we've got a domestic product here called the MLS, right? So if you liked it, why don't you go more regularly? So that will be the way that conversation should go in the future. So to go to your question, no, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by any of this. Nothing shocks me anymore. This is just the latest of the things that we could once upon a time never imagine is hurtling towards us. Games on Sundays, third and fourth place teams in the European Cup, reserve Premier League teams playing EFL teams in competitive games, a Swiss model for the Champions League. It's just the latest thing, and the strand, the thread that ties them together it's money. It's and people will go, well, it's greed. Yeah, okay, but it's our greed too. Right, our insatiable appetite for more. We want our teams to have better players. We want the product we watch to be better. We want to see more of it. We want to see that thing. I don't just want to watch it on telly. I want to actually go. We're all greedy for this thing. We're all a little bit complicit here.
Yeah, Adam, I wonder how much of FIFA's stepping back has to do with the impending World Cup in America as well as the potential of the Women's World Cup going there. But also, I mean, we look at the Premier League with all these various stakeholders now, American owners in there as well. What kind of conversations are coming from the Premier League in regards to playing a competitive Premier League game in America?
Well, officially, there's no conversations within the Premier League, and nobody in the Premier League would ever talk about doing this. I think the point you make about the World Cup is significant. I think Gianni Infantino is already moving over to Miami. FIFA have opened offices in the US. I think that's another point, Matt was making around whether US courts would start to have jurisdiction over FIFA. Well, actually, if you move half your legal team over there and some of your commercial operation and your president's living there, that starts to become pretty hard to argue that you look at US courts shouldn't have some jurisdiction. I think clearly FIFA see the next few years in the States as a massive opportunity. This summer you've got the Copa America. I know that's not their tournament, but it's a significant tournament. You have the FIFA Club World Cup next summer in 2025. You have the Men's World Cup 26. I would imagine the Women's World Cup 27 if the bid is successful. And then you also have the Olympics in 28. So, it is all eyes on the US for sport, for major global sports events for the next, 4 years or so. So FIFA want a big slice of that. And they also see it as, how long have we talked about football, soccer exploding in the US, that there's going to be this moment where it all takes off, whether it was Beckham or Messi or 94 World Cup. Personally, I don't think single moments change these things. This stuff is trends and patterns, and it takes time, and it's population changes and all that kind of stuff and accessibility. But FIFA are clearly keen to hitch their wagon. And also for a long time, Gianni Infantino has spoken about wanting to have 50 leading international teams that can compete with each other. But he also now talks about wanting 50 global club teams, not just concentrated in Europe. And I think on that, he's got a fair point, right? Like, there's some amazing historic football clubs in Mexico and Japan and the Middle East and Morocco. And as a result of, and a lot of them, now when they come to a Club World Cup, they don't have a chance of winning it, really, because the European team are so much stronger and richer. So I think he's got some sort of point there. So I don't think FIFA's current presidency would ever have been ideologically opposed to the idea of European matches being played globally, and also it's not only European matches that could come into this conversation. When you look at the population of the United States, Mexico national team games get bigger attendances than the US men's national team quite often. So you could take two big teams from Mexico, play those games in the US, and that would also be a pretty powerful thing. You may get two teams from Brazil wanting to do that, two teams from Argentina. So it's not just a European story, although that is what is driving this, let's be clear. So yeah, FIFA clearly keen to hitch this moment. Yeah, last week, Gianni Infantino addressed MLS owners. And as part of this, he was basically saying, put your hands in your pockets, guys, right? This is your chance over the next 3 or 4 years to loosen some of the kind of quite restraining roster rules in MLS about how much you can spend and how much can be allocated to the squads compared to European leagues or even compared to the Mexican leagues. And this is your chance to make a splash. I mean, I think some of these US billionaires in the room were looking at them being like, do you not think we've ever considered spending a bit of money before? And do you not think we've ever considered we don't want to be loss-making enterprises? But he kind of has a point, right? MLS over the next few years has an opportunity. And whether it will take it or not is an open question. And US sport is a highly, for a market, like I moved here a few weeks ago. If you go and try and take a rental apartment in the US and speak to some of the brokers, right, and listen to some of the brokers' fees that you get asked, the US economy is not a highly regulated space in certain aspects. US sport is an incredibly protectionist, regulated space, but it's protected between some very, very rich people. I'm not sure it's kind of designed to protect the little guy. And I think that, they see, certainly MLS sees the idea of a La Liga game coming over here or a Premier League game coming over here, and they are inherently resistant at the moment. Certainly, I think the MLS commissioner, Don Garber, is incredibly resistant to it because I think there is an insecurity there, right? The real thing's coming. It could jeopardize our market space, our broadcasting space, our sponsorship, just attendances, right? It could compete. I think some other US sports are nervous it could cannibalize some of their
Yeah, that
space.
was my next question. The NBA, NHL, NFL.
Sure.
I mean, come on.
But the flip side to that is, well, it's quite a hard argument for NBA and NFL to make, given they go to Paris and they go to London and they go to Germany for big games. And also, I think there is increasingly in these character-based sports this desire for football and football to blend off one another in some way. I think they're still working out quite how to do that.
Can you see a hybrid between American football and soccer? I mean, like, how did they even bridge that gap? I mean,
yeah, I think it's way more around like activations between, Harry Kane, does Harry Kane at the end of his career, which is something which he seems to be talking about.
He wants to. He loves American football. Yeah,
go and try and be an NFL player, right? And stuff like that. And just kind of these conversations between these different sports people. We saw JJ Watt last week do a really interesting thing, with Gary Neville and Roy Keane. And NBA as well. I think, there's always Premier League players going to watch NBA. So that's in its very nascent stages, but that's one of the arguments Relevant make. Not only the argument Matt was making earlier, which is, go and sell your tickets at these events, right? get some sort of deal where if I buy a ticket for Man United v Wolves in New Jersey, I'm also then getting a ticket for NYCFC or New York Red Bulls or whatever, right? So they see the opportunity in that. I think MLS for now are resistant. I think an organization like US Soccer is a little bit more interesting and nuanced. I think they instinctively would probably align themselves with MLS, but I think there's also a point at which, they would be looking at a return of the proceeds of any of these games. And I think they'd also be looking for, Don Garber a few weeks ago used this great phrase where he said the soccer world treats America as its ATM, basically withdrawing money, withdrawing, extracting from the soccer ecosystem. And I think that's true. And I think US Soccer would therefore be saying, well, what are you guys going to put in if you're going to come here and extract? So that might even just be 5–10% of the proceeds going to grassroots development of soccer in the US, meaning that the US has a chance of creating better players. Whether Premier League clubs would be prepared to do that or La Liga clubs is a whole other story. And I suppose that's where what we need to really get into, the really fun part of this, is who the hell is going to go and do this? Because that is the thorny, political, scary bit, I think, for most soccer fans.
Just to jump in, I mean, Adam made some great points there. Just a few, just little bullet points I'd throw in. First of all, is NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, they're all doing it now. All four of the major US sports teams play games abroad, right? And they all do it for the same reason, right? Because they've saturated their own market. They've looked at football, the truly global game, and thought, we'll have some of that. NFL was the first, and arguably they're the most saturated, but they're also the biggest. They're the biggest beast. They've been doing it for 15 odd years. NBA is really interesting. The most global of the truly popular US sports. They've just started to sort of do it, right? They played in London, Paris, Mexico City. They kind of dipped in. NHL, very, very recent. Another, I wouldn't say global game, but truly international game. Finland and Czech Republic, I think it was this year. But they are the most international in terms of the players in their own league. Americans are not the majority there. It's Canadians and then a huge number of East Europeans for years and years and years. They've been absolute superstars in that league from Russia and the Czech Republic, Scandinavia. So the really interesting story there. But they're doing it because they sort of need to. The business case is clear to them. And I wonder how often NHL or NBA executives sit and wonder, I hope we're not ruining the leagues in France and Russia and Scandinavia. No, that doesn't appear much of a conversation about that. Major League Baseball, again, truly, truly massive and has been trying to take games to, they had their Major League season opener in Seoul in South Korea. The Dodgers, the story of the summer, they opened in Seoul, not in LA. So they're all doing it. I think the other thing that I would say is we're actually talking about the same people often. The Premier League is half of them are Americans. Half of them own US sports franchises. Half of them own, therefore, stadiums in the States. We are talking about the same people who have the same relationships with broadcasters, who own amazing venues that they want to fill, that know the sports audiences. Right. So this conversation is a conversation amongst people who actually sort of are already bestriding leagues. I think the MLS points Adam makes are really interesting. There's possibly a bit of a tangent, but I do think we want to get into, okay, where this goes forward. But the MLS is timid. It's institutionally timid. And it's to do with its sort of kind of creation story. To cast your minds back a long way. NASL, right? Beckenbauer, Pele, those guys, the Cosmos, it blew up. They pursued a strategy, they went for it big, and it blew up. You then had years without a domestic soccer scene, professional scene. It relaunched around 94, and it's had a handbrake on. Arguably, certainly for the first 10, 15 years, they were terrified of going bust. Very strict salary caps, really hard, low salary caps. Ever since Beckham went, it's been this gradual story of, okay, right, let's behave more like the global leagues and go for it a bit. What Infantino was saying was, guys, can we actually completely take the handbrake off now and put your foot on it, right? Because this is your moment, and I want you, North America, to have good teams to play in my Club World Cup. So there is this sort of gradual, slow coming of age. And again, we're talking about the same people. Like most of these MLS owners own sports teams elsewhere, and it has been this sort of gradual story. I think what the global football industry is saying, if you want to be genuinely a top 10 league, it's time to start behaving like one. And I think we're seeing it, to be fair. I think the Messi deal is remarkably clever and cute, and there's definitely a way ahead. But I just think that Infantino intervention was interesting. Right. Now, why is this going to happen? I don't know when. It's going to happen because of this is just the direction of travel. It just is.
You generally think this is going to happen? You don't think they'll keep pushing back and it will come back again. They'll keep pushing back and it'll come back again.
Yeah, because I'm being really vague. What does this mean? Are competitive games going to be played in the US? Yes. In the next 5 years? Yeah, almost certainly. In the next 10 years, definitely. Will it be Premier League games? Maybe. I don't know. Will it be a Champions League final? I'd put that as a pretty high up. Will it be Community Shield, Super Cuppa, some stuff that the Italians and Spanish are already doing? Is the Community Shield even a competitive game? Discuss. All right. Well, that's an obvious one, isn't it? That's your sort of hors d'oeuvre. You give it a go. How about early rounds of the Carabao Cup? The EFL have a deal with Relevant. Do people in this country genuinely care about early rounds of the Carabao Cup? Again, look at the EFL. 1/3 of those clubs are owned by North Americans or by Brits who live in North America.
I mean, as Wrexham are climbing, I mean, it can be really interesting, right?
Wrexham the last few summers, sell out.
And again this summer. I mean, I just want to stress these pre-season games, the speed and scale at which they are selling out is mind-blowing. So Man United and Liverpool this summer, South Carolina, College Stadium, 77,000 capacity stadium. There was a pre-sale and then a full sale. It sold out in 3 hours, right? It sold out faster than Beyonce, faster than Jay-Z, right? The Barcelona Madrid is at the MetLife this summer. I looked at StubHub, one of those sort of ticket resales websites this weekend. $800 was the cheapest seat I could get.
Wow.
Right. This is what so when people talk about the opportunity here, I know there'll be fans listening to this saying, well, who cares about the money? Well, actually, quite a lot of people care about the money, not just the owners of the clubs. If we just take the Premier League for a moment, everyone's losing money, right? Everyone's scrambling to hit the profit and sustainability regulations. That's all we've spoken about for the past 6 weeks. So that's why when crypto comes along and NFT comes along, clubs dive headfirst into it. And if this comes along, which is offering huge hits of instant revenue, then they're going to be interested in it.
Yes, back to my point about Matt, though, when Matt was talking about the American owners, we're talking to the same people and we're talking, you said, whisper it quietly, Premier League clubs probably won't say it out loud, but you look at American owners, you see the money that can be made, you look at PSR restrictions at this moment in time, surely it's a no-brainer.
Well, it's a no-brainer, except that it's not. In the sense of, I think the business case is overwhelming. The challenges are obvious, right? The Premier League at the moment has the threat of a government regulator about to be imposed over it. I think any government at the moment would be it's an independent regulator, but I would imagine there would be huge political and media and fan pressure that would do everything to resist this moment. I think it could be potentially not as explosive as the Super League, because actually it's not. We're talking about a one-off games here or one-off rounds of games here. I think there are challenges to get through around, teams might lose a home game or away game or things like that, but you can kind of get around that. I think some teams would actually just agree to waive it because the money would be so big, to be honest. Also, some teams are useless at home, so they'll just think, well, it can't be any worse, right? So I think the threat of political intervention is probably a real one in English football. I think that's one of the reasons why there would be some early resistance. I think the government should also remember, though, an American person said to me yesterday, if the UK had the best diamonds in the world and it was, selling globally all over, and then there was an exhibition that was going on in the States, but you basically said, "Oh, we're not going to take it there," right? Because, it's too much to take it there, right? You just wouldn't do that with other industries. You wouldn't sort of seek to restrain the movement in other industries. But there aren't that many other industries that claim to be as racinated in their communities as football does still in the UK. So I think, just to go back to Matt's point, the pace of change we will see is, look at the deals that Relevant currently have. So, and when we say deals to sell, basically TV deals in North America as territories. And those places are La Liga, and they're the guys who've already tried to do it, right? La Liga, I think, would be number one, right? They make no bones about that. Serie A and the French League have already taken cup competitions abroad. They're very keen to compete with the Premier League. They need revenue. I think they go next. I'd put UEFA maybe second, actually, because UEFA also have a deal with Relevant, as we discussed. And I think there's loads of clubs all around Europe, I would include in this English clubs, German clubs, that are very open to taking Champions League games abroad. And whether that is, as Matt says, the Super Cup, which is at the moment Champions League versus Europa League winner, you make this opening tournament at the start, that you would involve maybe the two finalists in, or the two finalists of the Champions League, Europa League, or you find some other qualification format for it, and you take that there, and it's competitive in some format. Or you take the opener of the Champions League and you create a proper opening night. The people that are currently powerful in UEFA and the ECA, people like Nasser Al-Khelaifi at PSG, he is not disguising that he would love to do this. He's saying the Champions League should be as big as the Super Bowl, right? Every Champions League game should be an event. He's spoken glowingly about how Americans do all this like shoulder events around sports fixtures. So you could have concerts, you could have people flying in, VIPs, dignitaries. You make a proper showpiece event of it. So I think there is that appetite there from UEFA. And I don't think that would be resisted too heavily by any clubs, really. The question with all of this is, if, for example, Barcelona go and play Girona in Miami, who gets the money, right? Where does the revenue go within the Spanish soccer ecosystem? Does it just go to Barcelona and whoever they happen to play? Or if Manchester United go and play Everton, does it just go to those teams? Or, because the Premier League's been quite good at sharing its money, it's been less so over the last few years, but does that money get shared equally between the Premier League, particularly if these are just one-off fixtures? Or does one or two clubs have an advantage? And do they actually deserve that advantage because they're the clubs that have had the guts to go and be the guinea pigs as well, and take all the political storm that comes with it? While there are clubs, certainly, I'm sure Wrexham would love to go and play a regular season game in the States. It would be amazing for them. But I would be very surprised if some of the big English clubs let Wrexham go first, actually. So I imagine the Premier League would have to move in unison with the EFL unless the Premier League just decides we're not doing this.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that, Adam, and any of that, which is why I wondered. I'm speculating myself here about the Carabao Cup. That could be the sort of the meeting of minds. But anyway, that's just an idea I'm going to throw out there. I think because there'll be people listening to this getting angry with us, right? Because we've just spent 25 minutes explaining why we think this is going to happen, direction of travel, just right, mood music and all that. I think we should probably remind everyone of the last time the Premier League really tried to do this. That was the 39th game in 2008. I reported on it at the time. It was incredibly controversial and was shot down pretty fast, despite the fact that the clubs really wanted to do it, which is why they're still, 16 years on, reticent to go there again. Certainly talk about it publicly again anyway. That was to get around the losing a home fixture. It was a new round of fixtures, 10 games. It was going to be 5 cities around the world. game on Saturday, game on Sunday. And the TV companies were going to love it. And boom, the minute this got out, it was, I can't believe you're doing this. People raising points about the competitive integrity of the league. How would it work? How would you seed these games? People worried about, well, this is the thin end of the wedge, right? I mean, we're your most loyal customers. We don't matter anymore. The people, season ticket holders with this expectation that we should see every game. What are you doing? And then I think the really big pushback, which is where FIFA jumped in, massive opposition from leagues that were already worried back then about the might of the Premier League. And I think, if I remember rightly, it was people like the Japanese league, the Korean league. They were like, you already come over here in the summer and you make us look a bit daft. You can't bring a real game here. This will kill us. And then, MLS as well, back in North America, these leagues were just very concerned about the Premier League just stamping all over their product. Now, some of those things haven't gone away, which is why I go back to my very first answer, that money and negotiation and revenue sharing and cross promotion of the domestic products and just being very sensitive to your host is going to have to happen. Otherwise, this doesn't get off the ground. And that's before we even talk about how you sell this to fans here. And that's why this will be really hard to do. I'm not suggesting otherwise, and incredibly controversial. By the way, I haven't told you what my opinion of it is. I'm just telling you what's going on out there. And I can imagine that the Bundesliga will be last, all right, where there's a very strong fan culture and, a sort of conservatism around the football product and how they talk about it. So there's plenty of hurdles to get over here. And there's plenty of things to sort of pause for thought. We haven't even talked about the environmental impact. This stuff should not be done lightly. I'm just telling you that the football industry, the numbers are going to make this happen in the same way that people got upset about playing football on Sundays, in the same way that people got upset about third and fourth place teams in the Champions League. It will happen. 48 team World Cups. It will happen.
I'm a little bit less convinced that, well, Matt says it will happen. And as he said before, what it is a very open question.
And when?
And when, right?
And when. I think the biggest challenge, I would say, outside of La Liga and maybe Serie A in France, just because they're kind of desperate for revenue at the moment, I think one of the biggest issues that English clubs still have, and we saw this so clearly in the Super League, is there is no one in English football that has the kind of clout and credibility to make an argument to the media and the fans at the moment in a really convincing way that is listened to within English football, that carries a kind of a weight. When you think of, Man City's owner doesn't talk. Chelsea's owners at the moment, are seen in a pretty negative way. And, you can imagine if Todd Bowley comes out and says, we're taking the Premier League to America, how that will go down. Arsenal's owners are pretty quiet. FSG, ended up doing this kind of, it looked like they were sort of being held at gunpoint and doing a video to camera after the Super League, if you remember. Joel Glazer's not going to be listened to. Jim Ratcliffe might be. He might be in that window, but let's see how the summer transfer window goes. Daniel Levy isn't going to bring the football fans room with him. And everyone just is pointing arrows at Richard Masters, who's CEO of the Premier League. So that makes it very, very difficult, right, at the moment. And I think you would get some players that would probably speak out against it as well, because they want, the fans to like them, or they might genuinely not like the idea as well. So I think that's another challenge for the Premier League, because you have to remember that ecosystem of English football will shudder against this. So you'll have politicians talking out because they either feel strongly or see, easy acclaim in it. You'll get some very, very traditional conservative views from the media. I think the fans groups will be furious with it. So and then you could see a situation where they just fold, because that's kind of been what happens a few times over the past few years. And it's interesting to see whether they kind of resist on this one. And I think the only way that this would happen with England is if they wait it out. So people see La Liga go there for the odd game and the world doesn't fall in. Italy go there, France go there, Champions League goes there, and I think that would start to normalize it in some way. And then it feels like this thing that has to happen rather than a thing we're driving. I imagine that would have to be the strategic way of going about it, to be honest, because otherwise, I just don't think there's anyone currently in English football that can carry the room with them.
Yeah, Matt, there's a I guess you both have touched on it really. There's an emotional aspect to this, which is the fans. Let's face it, and Nick Miller just written a piece on the new sort of culture war gripping, the Premier League in particular, corporate interest versus authentic fans. And we've spoken about corporate interest for the whole of this pod so far. Imagine Dortmund, and you said maybe the German teams might have this massive pushback. Dortmund, we see that big yellow wall. Can that be replicated in Arizona? If we do get to see a Champions League game over there, do you have the same feeling that you would? And would you get that by watching it as a consumer? And I guess I'm thinking as a European consumer.
Well, can it be replicated? They'll try, right? But then we get into a conversation about authenticity, which is so much of these sort of football culture wars boil down to. If you want the real thing, come here, or go to Germany, or go to, and they're doing it. Here's the thing, right? I'm not telling anybody to do anything they're not already doing. Football tourism is a fact. It's a massive success story, not just for English football clubs. I would argue for UK PLC, right? It's happening. Dare I say, the Athletics' entire business model depends on it, right? Okay, so I think we have to acknowledge that. This podcast is about that.
Yeah.
But how far do you go, right? And when do you spoil it? That's, I think, the thing that everyone should have in their mind. Don't spoil it, right? Let it happen. If this thing's going to change, should it change organically? That's normally best. So this debate between your loyal customer, the ones you can reach, the ones that football clubs traditionally reach through season tickets, the people that will buy the real shirt, not the fake shirt, people that buy the most expensive TV subscription. That's all changing. It's been changing for my entire life. And the big clubs, the Premier League clubs, know that best. They can see their own numbers. They know how many tourists are in the grounds every game. They know where they're selling shirts. They know how well their overseas tours do. They know where their sponsor, portfolio is, and they know that the pressure they're under. Oh, can you come over here? We're your tire sponsor. We're from Korea. Can you come? Can you come here? Can we have access to your place? They know all this better than you or I. And that inevitably leads to tensions to as I said, your most loyal. The fans you can touch. And let's be honest, the fans who will save your club when things go wrong. And unfortunately, that's the other thing that I spend my time writing about. They're the ones that will go out with buckets and organise whip rounds and write letters to MPs and campaign outside grounds. So this is the thing. So there is this endless tension between the way football was, the way football has sort of been constructed in this country and every other country around the world, by the way. They have fans and leagues and stories like this everywhere. And the way it's going, particularly at the top end. And it's a global game. And they're playing a global game, these globalists. Inevitable tensions. This is just one of them.
Which brings me on to ticketing, really, and sort of finish on this, Adam. I mean, you talked about how quickly those tickets sold out in America. Is it slowly becoming out of reach of those people that Matt is just speaking about, that the guys that would pick it to their MPs and say, we demand this for our club because we have this emotional and cultural connection to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really, if you go and try and buy a ticket for a premium product sports event in the United States and compare those prices to what the Premier League are asking for back in the UK, I mean, I'm just making that comparison, not saying, it's right or wrong what Premier League clubs are doing, but even if you look at West End tickets at the moment, right? Like there's maybe an argument that the Premier League, because it's been so successful, has actually been able to keep ticket pricing at a reasonable level. Not talk about the hospitality and the amazing seats here, but the general pricing, I think for quite a long time has been pretty fair, and they've kept the away tickets to a reasonable price as well. Whether that will stay, I think, is a bigger question. And you have to remember as well that people travel. So when I talk about the US premium tickets, people don't travel within the US like they do for Premier League games. And no one over here can really get their heads around the fact that it costs, 300 quid to go on a train to go 2 hours in the UK at the moment if you happen to book on the wrong day, right? So that although the headline ticket pricing in the States, if you're Chelsea's owner, LA Dodgers, and you're comparing those ticket prices, you will be looking and thinking, God, that's different, right? That is less than it maybe looks like it should be. But there are all these other factors which come in, like the travel people make, what they spend at the ground, etc. And also just the fact, the UK's economy has stagnated at best, right, for quite a long time now. And as a result of that, people aren't earning more, and people are struggling with cost of living crisis. And I mean, the Tottenham one a few weeks ago where they did the price rise, but then Daniel Levy gets a bonus that's almost equivalent to what you earn from the price rise. It's just like, what are you doing, right? Just like see the optics of this and just don't do it like that, right? Like do your bonus next year, right? If you're going to do it, right? Or don't do it this year. It's incredible how often some of these guys that are really, really clearly smart from a business point of view make decisions that they must realize are going to cause them a load of hassle, right? And a load of backlash. And that's why you should never rule out games going to the United States, because they will try and do things that they either know or are told and do not listen to their advisors are going to be hugely unpopular. And by the way, we've spoken about the United States for quite a long time here. There are some other places that might fancy a game, right? Spoke about Asia briefly. But there's another place that has a World Cup in 2034 that's already hosting Spanish games, Italian games, Saudi Arabia. They could pay, right? They've got a pretty strong fan culture there as well. I think that, I mean, actually, not all the Saudi League games get filled, but like the big ones involving Ronaldo tend to do pretty well. So, as far as I know, Relevant haven't been speaking to Saudi, but that doesn't mean other people within football aren't speaking to Saudi. Sounds like Gerard Piqué has been speaking to Saudi quite a lot over the past few years in terms of, the Spanish Super Cup going over there. So, yeah, I mean, this is a conversation we've had about the US, but it could be a way bigger one, and that's why the first one is so important, because it just creates a precedent that enables lots and lots of other people to go and do it.
All right, gents, let's end it there. Matt, Adam, really appreciate your time, and do not forget to rate and review the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for listening.